Hello everyone, I'm here to take you on a brief tour of some of the DSLR lenses that are available for you through Studio 300. The only requirement to be able to check out these lenses is to complete the Studio 300 orientation. That is now available online, and if you would like to begin the process, go ahead to fountaindale.org/orientation and fill out the form. Now let's get started to seeing some of these great lenses and what they can do for you. I wanted to start out this video with a quick lens overview and break down some of the anatomy of a lens. One of the first things you should consider whether you're going to check out a lens or purchase one for yourself is the focal range. Now, lenses come in two different types. There are prime lenses, which have a single focal range, or there are variable focal ranges or zoom lenses that have a range. So this one here is an 18 to 55 millimeter, which is called a standard kit lens because it's usually what comes with your DSLR entry-level camera. Now, you can go from 18 millimeters all the way to 55. The next thing you want to consider when purchasing or checking out a lens is the aperture range, and you will find that information usually either on the side of a lens, or in this instance we will find it here in the front. You can faintly see that, I'm trying not to get the glare, that there is quite a bit of text here on the inner rim of the lens. Now, what it says is Canon zoom lens, and then it says the mount type, which is EFS, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Then we have the focal range again, 18 to 55 millimeter, and then we have the aperture range, which is 3.5 to 5.6. If it had a single number like 2.8, that means that no matter what focal range I am, I can open my aperture all the way down to 2.8. Since this has an aperture range, meaning 3.5 to 5.6, that means that at 18 millimeters, the smallest aperture that I can set is 3.5. And as I go up in focal range, that also changes. So at 55 millimeters, the smallest aperture that I can set is 5.6. So that's something that you should consider when purchasing your lenses. The next thing you want to take a look at is whether there are motors involved with your lens. So on the back of your lens, you will sometimes see these little gold metal, and those are the contacts that talk to your camera. On the side of my lens, I do have two switches. This is for automatic to manual focus, and then there is a stabilizing motor in here. Now, the stabilizer may have a different name because it is dependent on the brands. The last thing you want to take a look at is the millimeter of this front element. So this one says 58 millimeters here in the front. Trying to see if you can get that right there. That right there. And that's so you can purchase filters that go on the front of your lens. One of the most important filters you should get for your lens, which they are stackable, which is great, is this UV filter. Okay, this is a protection filter that can go on the front of your lens, which will protect it from debris, from dust, from water, and also from breakage. So if you accidentally drop your lens, chances are this will break before your lens. Now, obviously, if it's a very long drop, it's gonna crack no matter what. And some things you should consider also is you should never introduce your fingers to the front of your lens, never touch that front lens. Accidents do happen, but you want to clean off that lens as soon as possible so that no oils get inside the gaskets. Same for the back. You do not want to introduce your fingers into this area. The last thing that I will talk about is the mount type. So the mount type is important because if this does not match your camera, it's not going to work. So you need to know what types of mounts your camera accepts. Now, certain cameras will accept both EFS and EF lens types, and then some will just not accept many types. There are adapters, but sometimes they don't work fairly well. So you want to kind of match things up as best as possible. Now this is EFS, which is made for ASPC sensor sizes. So that means that I don't have to do any multiplication. But if this was an EF mount, then and I'm putting it on an ASPC sensor, meaning it's not a full frame camera, I need to do some multiplication. For Canon, that's going to be 1.6. For Nikon, that's going to be 1.5. Other manufacturers, you'll have to take a look to see what their multiplication factors are. So that's kind of the gist of what a lens anatomy is. And now we'll take a look at how we're going to test these lenses, and then we'll do a quick rundown of all of these lenses and what they're great for. For the Canon lenses, we are going to be using the Canon Rebel T6 to test all of our lenses. This camera is an ASPC sensor type camera, so some of our full frame lenses you'll have to do a little bit of multiplication. I also use a printed out target that we are going to use to test the lenses at various focal ranges and aperture ranges. I also will be testing the lenses for how quiet or loud the motor is, and then for how speedy and accurate the focusing is on these lenses. So let's do a quick rundown of some of these lenses, what they're good at, what they're not so good at, and what you can use them for. Let's get started with the 18 to 55 millimeter Canon lens. This is a kit lens, which usually comes with most DSLRs. It's a very basic lens, doesn't have the greatest of glass, but if you're in an outdoor sunny situation or a very well lit area, this lens will do the job. Low light situations is where this lens is really going to struggle. So some of the things that we should know about this lens, it is an EFS mount, so you don't have to do any multiplication with this one if you're on an ASPC camera. It does have your automatic focus to manual focus switch here, as well as stabilizing motors. It has fairly fast and accurate focusing. It is very good at focusing. That I do like. Although the motors can be a little loud if you're doing video work or if you are somewhere where you really kind of need to be quiet, these motors are a bit loud. And it's not the sharpest at the lowest aperture of 3.5, but once you stop down to about 4, it gets a little bit better. The other problem is it does have quite a bit of color fringing in certain areas, and you'll see that from the test shots. So you'll get a lot of violet, sometimes a little bit of green, and it doesn't fully go away depending on your lighting situation. So let's take a look at the next lens. Next up, we have the Canon 75 to 300 millimeter focal range lens. This is a telephoto lens, which gives you quite some reach if you need it. It has good focal ranges for doing portraits, for doing sports photography, for doing nature photography, as if your subject is pretty far, this is going to get you nice up and close to it. Some of the things that we should know about this lens, this is an EF mount lens, so you will have to do your crop multiplication. So for Canon, that's going to be 1.6. It has automatic to manual focus switch right here, but it has no stabilizing motors. So when you are at that furthest 300 millimeter focal range, any shake is going to make your picture blurry. That is another thing that will cause you to have to work with higher shutter speeds. Since you have no stabilizing motors, you do have to make sure that you work with higher shutter speeds. So that's kind of a little bit of a drawback. Some of the things I like about this lens is the focal range is great. It's got pretty okay glass. It's not the best of glass, but it's better than the 18 to 55. And what we mean by glass is actually the glass that's all in here. There's a lot of pieces of glass throughout this tubing here. It is not the fastest at focusing. And that is one thing we did struggle with this when I was testing it. And I was in a very good, well-lit situation, and I had a lot of struggles when I was doing focusing with this. The motors are a bit they're not as noisy as the 18 to 55, but they're also not as quiet as I wish them to be. There is some color fringing at the lower apertures. It does fairly disappear at the higher apertures, but we don't see a lot of that violet and green around, you know, the edges and things like that. So all in all, it's a decent telephoto lens. You know, the high quality telephoto lenses will set you back quite some money. So, you know, something like this will get the job done, especially if you're outdoors. Next up, we have the only prime lens that we have for the Canon line, which is the 50mm prime 1.4 aperture lens. This is a really great street lens, so you can take this around and go and shoot street photography. It's good for portraits, medium shots. Not so great for landscape, but I mean, if you get far enough back, it's going to do the job. It has very shallow depth of field, so the 1.4 lets you open wide up and let in a lot of light and give you some really soft and beautiful backgrounds. But at that 1.4, it's not going to be the sharpest lens. So you end up stopping down to about 2.8 to get a little more sharpness, but it does the job. It does some really great photographs for you. This is very solidly built. There's a lot of nice glass in here. You can see all the way through it. You can see right through it. So that's how you know you're getting a lot of light in there. As you can see right through. One of the things that I like about this lens is that it focuses fairly well. So we do have our automatic to manual focus switch right here, but no stabilizing motors again. But because it is 50mm and it's not a high focal range, you can bump up your shutter speed to get some more sharpness out of your lens. One of the things that it is going to have some tough time with is at that 1.4, it is going to struggle with focusing. Not only the sharpness, but also the focusing. There is slight color fringing at the 1.4 range, but it disappears at about 4. So at f4, you're going to see most of it disappear. Really great lens, love it. There's some really great things that you can do with this lens. The next Canon lens we're going to talk about is another telephoto lens, which is 55 to 250 millimeters, so you can get from some really nice medium shots. You do have your portrait ranges here from like your 70 to almost 135. You're going to have some really nice portrait ranges, and then you have that far reach to get into the nature photography where you won't have your subject is very far away and you're going to try to get up close. Really great for everything from medium shots to sports photography if you're in the stands, to portraits as well. Now this is an entry-level telephoto lens, so the glass is not as great as the other one, but one thing that does redeem it a bit is it does have stabilizing motors. So we do have your automatic and manual switch here, but we also have stabilization motors which help with some of the sharpness. This one does not hunt as much when focusing as the other one. I didn't struggle as much with this one. The focusing is fairly fast. The motors are a bit loud. I feel like a lot of the Canon lenses, when they have the stabilizing motors, tend to be a little bit louder. And then it does have some color fringing as well at the lower apertures. So the aperture range for this one is going to be 4 to 5.6, similar to the other telephoto lens. Lastly, for the Canon line, we have a third-party lens from Tamron. Tamron makes some of my favorite lenses, and this one is not my favorite, but it is a good lens. This is a mid-range lens, so we're talking, you know, $500–600, and it's got fairly decent glass. It's 60mm prime, but it is a very specialized lens. This lens is meant for macro photography, so that's when we're getting up close and personal with our subjects, whether they're very small ants or, you know, details in flowers or things like that. It's got a 1:1 magnification ratio, which we see right here. It does have automatic to manual focus switch here, but honestly, with how shallow your depth of fields are, the autofocus is horrible. It's really hard to focus. It hunts a lot. You'll be trying to focus on one little aspect of your subject and it just goes everywhere. So I tend to turn off the automatic focus with this lens. It has an aperture of 2, so that is throughout the 60 millimeter, since it's a prime lens. So you can stop down all the way to 2, and it's going to give you depths of field that are in the millimeter ranges. All in all, it's a great lens. I didn't really get to do much testing with this time around. I'll try to hunt down some sample shots that I had from before and show them here with what I've talked about. But other than that, this is a great little starter macro lens. So, you know, take it out, go find some insects or some beautiful flowers to photograph, and you'll see what this lens can really do. Next up, we are going wide. This is a very wide lens. It goes down to 11 millimeter focal range. So this almost gets to that fisheye look. It's going to give you a very wide, almost panoramic look. It's made by Nikon. We have this lens both for the Canon and for the Nikon line. This is a full frame mount, so you will have to do your multiplication factors for this lens. One thing to note is this has a slide switch. So instead of having like a toggle switch, we do have a slide switch. So you have to slide this front element up and down to go from automatic focus to manual focus. This lens is really great for landscape photography. You can use it for, let's say, huge groups of people. Like if you have a group of 100 that you want to photograph, this is going to get really wide and allow you to see all that space. But it also distorts features a bit, so you need to be careful if you're at the lower end of the aperture. Speaking of aperture, this has an aperture of 2.8 throughout every single range. So even at 16, you can stop down to 2.8, which allows a lot of light in. So one thing that you may use this lens for is nighttime photography, because since you have a low aperture setting, you can set this up on a tripod and do some bulb fully open shots where you're recording for a long time. Now, if you're recording for minutes at a time, you will need a specialized tripod that will, you know, move with your objects. But other than that, this is a really great landscape lens, great for panoramas. You can stitch photos together and do some really fun stuff with it. Again, this lens is available for both the Nikon and the Canon lines, and it is going to be a great lens to take out with you if you're gonna go hiking and you really want to get some nice landscape shots. Next up, we have the Tamron 28 to 75 millimeter lens. This has an aperture of 2.8 throughout your whole focal range. This is one of my favorite starter mid-entry lenses, honestly. I love this lens so much. I've taken it with me almost everywhere. It's one of my favorite walk-around lenses. Since you have, 28 on the wide side, you can get into some slightly landscape photography. And then you have the 75, which gets you into that almost portrait range. This is made for full-frame cameras, so you will have to do your multiplication factor. We have this lens available for both the Canon and the Nikon line. It's a mid-range lens, so you're talking $500–600. They do have a newer version of this out already, but it's got a slightly different focal range. And Tamron makes, honestly, some really great lenses. I absolutely love their stuff. I own this one, and there's another one that I own from them that I just absolutely love. It's going to be great for medium shots, some landscapey, portraits. Soft backgrounds are going to shine with this because you've got that wide aperture. And you can also do even some nighttime photography since you've got that lower aperture. All in all, this is a very well-made lens. It is a little bit heavier, so it is going to get, it's going to tire you out if you've got it carrying it for hours. Other than that, I would say there's only a couple things that are bad about this lens. It is a little bit soft at 2.8 even in the center, but higher shutter speeds should help with that. There is some slight color fringing also at that 2.8, but once you get to about 4, it's absolutely fine. Other than that, honestly, you cannot go wrong with this lens. Next up, we have the Nikon 55 to 300 millimeter. So this has got some really wide range in its focal planes. We do have automatic to manual focus switches, and we also have vibration reduction motors. So that's your image stabilization right there. This has an aperture range of, it's not on there. So let's see where it is on this lens. So here on the side, we have our aperture range of, maybe not there. Oh, here we go. So aperture range of 4.5 to 5.6, so not too bad. At 55, we can stop down all the way to 4.5, and at the offset of 300, our minimum aperture is going to be 5.6. This is a basic telephoto lens, but it is not a bad lens. Okay glass, made for ASPC, so this is made for crop sensor, so no multiplication involved. Good for medium shots, portrait, nature, and sport photography. I've actually used this at sporting events, and it does an amazing job. Slight color fringing at the lower apertures, but as you stop down, it's going to completely disappear. The motor can be a bit loud, so that's the only thing that I would say is a little bit of a drawback, especially if you can, if you're going to be in a situation where it's very quiet. The focusing can be a little slow at times, but it's not too bad. I didn't struggle as much as I did with the Canon kind of telephoto lens. Other than that, it's a really great lens to take out with you on the trails and to take some pictures of birds and things like that. Really great lens for that, or as I said, sporting events. I really enjoyed this at a baseball game. Other than that, I would say, not a bad lens to have in your kit. Last lens we're going to talk about is from Venus Optics, Laowa, and this is a 100 millimeter macro lens. This is a very solidly built lens. It's made of metal. It is the only fully manual lens that we have, so there is no motors involved with this. This is made for the Nikon, so we don't have the Canon equivalent. You have the Tamron macro lens for that. This is going to be a 100 millimeter prime lens with an aperture of 2.8, and it has a 1:1 representation for your magnification. One thing, it's very sharp. It has really good glass. I really enjoy working with this lens. I don't have test images right now with this one. This came in not too long ago, and I haven't had a chance to get in the studio and do some work with this. But I did take a couple test shots, though I accidentally deleted them, so sorry about that. That was a while ago. But one thing I did note that I didn't like or enjoy about this lens is that they put the aperture ring down here, and that makes it very difficult because I'm used to like having the focus, or like when you're trying to put the lens on the camera, it's the whole bottom element moves, so it's really tough to get this on the camera and then off. The focus ring is really nice and smooth, so that at least makes up for the fact that this was put all the way in the back. And it is fairly loose. I really didn't like that. I didn't enjoy that. But they make some great lenses. Honestly, they make some really great lenses. They're very sharp. They're very clear. Your images come out looking great. And we had one before that was a 15 millimeter. Unfortunately, somebody dropped it and it broke, so we replaced it with the 100 millimeter one. And I've seen some really great photos taken with this. I would say that if you're going to go macro, you can't go wrong with Venus Optics. So that's going to cover it for the Nikon lenses. Time of this recording, unfortunately, our Nikon D5300 was out, so I did not get to test the lenses that come in that kit. I will say that they are fairly comparable to their Canon equivalents, meaning they do have some color fringing at the lower apertures. They tend to be okay in focusing. The glass is entry level, so it's not the best of glass, but if you're in fairly well lit situations, you shouldn't have any trouble. Low light situations is where you're going to struggle. I believe that kit comes with an 18 to 55 millimeter and also a telephoto lens, though I cannot recall which size it is, and unfortunately I couldn't find the information, so I'll have to wait till that kit comes back. If it does come back and I can add it to this video, I will. Otherwise, you know, if you have any questions about lenses, don't hesitate to contact us. We will answer all of your questions, and I hope you have some fun and enjoy these lenses. Take them out for a swing and let us know what you think. Share your images with us. We always love to see what you do and how great you are and creative you are with everything that you do with your projects here at Studio 300. See you next time.